Hi everyone, today we're working on the install of the 3rd gen Tacoma hybrid front bumper. So the first thing we need to start with, we're going to open the hood and then we need to remove the grille from the vehicle. So the grille comes out pretty easily. There's just one plastic clip on each side here by the headlight and 2 screws, one there, one there. The other plastic clip is right here by the headlight. So we're going to go ahead and pop those out first. And then you'll use a 10mm socket to remove the screws. Once those are removed, just lift up a little bit on the grill to get it off those plastic clips, and then you'll pull forward from the bottom and it just unclips from the bumper cover. Some might have Toyota safety sense, so you would have to disconnect. There's a connector here that usually plugs into the grill if you have Toyota safety sense, so you'll have to disconnect that before you pull the grill out. Next thing we're going to do is disconnect the fog light wiring harness. So that wire goes with the bumper. Next, you'll want to get this plastic clip out. You have to squeeze it from the bottom to remove it, and it'll pop up out of the hole. So once that's loose, you'll have to remove the rest of the plastic clips for the bumper cover. One here, and then we've got them across the steel trim here. All those plastic clips have to get removed. Just pop the head out just like the other ones by the grill. Pop the top up with a screwdriver, then remove the clip. So the next thing you need to do is remove the hardware from the inside of the fender well area that holds the fender flare and the bumper cover. There's a screw there, plastic clip here, and some screws along the bottom. So to remove the plastic clip, you just want to pry underneath it. Then you want to pry that plastic clip away from the flare and push it towards the inside of the fender well, just a little, so that it will disconnect from the fender flare. Then just use your 10mm socket to remove the rest of the screws. And there's one more plastic clip to remove on this side as well. The next thing we're going to do is put some marks on the plastic cover, bumper cover, so that we know where to put our masking tape to get ready for cutting. So the first mark we made is right down here, kind of at the top of this little ridge in the plastic. So we just made a straight line that comes out from there around the corner a little bit. And then there's 2 measurements that we're going to take and make a mark. So first one, we want to go 6 inches from this point straight down and make a mark on the plastic cover. And the next one we're going to do is 3 1/8 inches from this seam down to the edge of the flare. Okay, so those are our 3 marks that we want. Next thing we're going to do is grab a long piece of masking tape and lay it across those lines all the way across the fender flare as well. So we got our measurements marked out. We laid our masking tape across the bumper, lined it up with our marks, and then we took a knife and just cut the tape right here, because next we're going to remove the bumper cover from the vehicle, and we want this tape to stay with the bumper and this piece to stay with the flare on the vehicle. So we did that, and then we peeled back the inner fender liner. You can just kind of pull on it and jam it behind the tire here just so it stays out of the way. And the next thing we need to do is disconnect the flare from the bumper cover so that we can get the cover out from behind it. So there's two plastic clips that are attached to the flare, one in somewhere in here and up there. They just have a flat tab that you push on it and then pull out away from the plastic, and it'll come out of there. So there's a little tab right here that you can push on like that, and it disconnects it from the plastic. So up above that, there is these little small blue clips that go into the flare. So those are behind here. This end goes into a square hole in the fender. So you want to reach up in between, behind there, and pinch it together and pull it out of the fender at the same time. So you can at least get this first one unclipped, and the flare will move far enough to be able to get the bumper cover off of the truck. So now that the flare has been removed and it's loose, we're ready to take the bumper cover off. So there's just the cover itself kind of wraps around a bracket and just hooks onto the plastic behind it. So you'll want to get in behind here, and you have to peel the plastic bumper over that little spacer piece first, and then reach up from the back and just push on that cover so that it pops off of the clips there. It takes a pretty good amount of pressure to get it to break loose. So once those are popped loose on both sides, you should be able to just pull straight forward on the cover, and the entire cover will come off of the vehicle. So now we've removed the entire bumper cover from the truck, and we came around to the edges here. The next thing you want to do, since the fender flare was covering, this tape line on the vehicle, we just took another piece of tape and extended this line out all the way so we know where to cut. So that's the first thing you'll want to do, is add that piece of tape. And then next we're going to take apart the inside of the cover here. We're going to disconnect the fog light, take this screw out and actually pull the fog light out of the bumper. And then we're going to want to unclip all of these little plastic clips all the way around so that we can take this little fog light trim piece out. And then we'll go around, and you want to stick a screwdriver in between these and pry on them all the way around these clips here, across the inside, on the bottom and top, all the way around both sides, because we're going to remove this entire piece. So this entire unit will come out of the bumper cover, and then we'll do our cutting after that. The reason we take everything apart like this and remove it is because we're going to keep this upper portion of plastic that goes across and connects these two pieces, and everything else will come out. So this is going to stay, and we're going to install that back on the vehicle, and that's going to help give support to the grille once it goes back on. So we've got all of our plastic trim and the fog lights removed from the bumper cover. So now we're ready to cut the plastic. So we want to cut on this side of the tape, of course, down here along the bottom, all the way out. And as you come around the inside here, you kind of want to slope your cutting tool to go with the angle of this plastic right under here. So you want to cut at that angle and just remove these little pieces of the fog light bucket so those come off. And again, don't cut anything over here. We want to leave this piece attached to the center all the way across to this one. For this bumper, we're using just a regular 4.5-inch angle grinder with cutoff wheel to cut the plastic. There's multiple tools you could use, like a Dremel tool with a cutting wheel, or like an air saw or something like that. This is just what we have, and it works for us. The only thing is, because the grinder spins so fast, it'll kind of melt the plastic and leave some chunks on there you have to clean up afterwards. But the angle grinder does work pretty well. We just finished cutting our plastic bumper cover, and this is what it should look like after you've got the cutting done. You'll have this one piece connected from side to side there. So once that's done, you can clean up your edges, all the little chunks of plastic that are on there. You can use a knife to scrape along the edge, or just kind of like a buffing wheel on the grinder to clean it up a bit. Next thing you want to do is go back to the vehicle, and then you'll want to cut your fender flare off at the bottom of the tape line. Cut straight across. Now that the fender flare has been trimmed off, there's this plastic bracket underneath. This portion needs to be cut off as well, but it's attached to the fender and we don't want to cut into the fender, so we're going to take this bracket off of the fender first to cut it. So we're just going to mark it with a piece of tape. Just put one on there, line it up right with the same area the flare was trimmed. And then we need to take this little red clip off right here. You can use a Phillips screwdriver, put it in the end, turn it just about a half turn, and it pops loose and the clip will come out. Then you'll use 10mm socket up top, and then that plastic bracket will come off the fender, and you can cut the end of it with your grinder or die grinder, whichever tool you were using before. So the plastic mounting bracket behind the flare has now been trimmed off. We reinstalled that piece. And the other thing we're going to do after that is take care of this extra fender liner material. So we just use a sharp blade on a box cutter knife, usually cuts through it really easily. So we're gonna cut from this corner along this line of the body through the plastic and discard all of that, and then whatever's left can be pushed up inside the fender well. And we usually use a couple of thread cutting or self-tapping screws with large washers to hold the plastic up inside the fender. You just want to make sure that when you put those screws in, that there's nothing in the way up above the screw, and that you're not going to puncture any holes into any wiring or anything in the engine bay up above. And the last little bit that may or may not need to be trimmed is this support bracket underneath the grill. It might be hanging down too far for some winches. We recommend using non-integrated winches, ones that you can mount the control box off to the side of the winch instead of directly on top. But if you need a little bit of room for your winch, you may have to trim this portion off right here so the winch can fit underneath, and then you'll need to mount your control box off to the side of the winch. So we've got our plastic fender liner all trimmed out. We ended up attaching it through an existing hole here with a 1/4-inch bolt and washers, and then we used a self-drilling screw with a washer to hold the plastic to the inside of the fender there. And then we used 2 self-drilling screws with washers on this side and just drill them right up into the inner fender there to hold the plastic in place. So that's been finished, and the other thing we did was trim out this grill support bracket for winch clearance. So that piece is now cleaned out. You probably want to spray the edge of that with some paint so it doesn't rust, and that stuff is all ready to go. Before we put the plastic back on below the headlights, we're going to want to remove this aluminum support bar that goes across the front of the frame. So you can either use a 14mm wrench, take these nuts off the outside and the one on the inside, or you can pop this plastic out, and then there's 14mm nuts on the inside here that you can get to with a socket and impact if you want to remove this piece first and then take these off. Either way, all of those parts need to be removed. So we've removed that aluminum support bar from the front of the frame. Next thing we need to take out is these pieces on the bottom here. Take this bolt out, then you want to remove the factory tow hook there too. Take those two bolts out. So we want to do that on both sides. Remove this bolt, take this piece out, and then we also want to take the hardware out for the power steering cooler. Remove this bolt and remove that bolt so the power steering cooler is loose. So when removing the hardware for the power steering cooler, you'll have to do those two bolts that bolt it to the frame here. Plus there's also another bolt that supports the line up on the side of the frame back inside there. So you can access that from the top of the frame rail. You can see the bolt right there. So we'll go into the fender well area, and it's going to be behind this rubber fender liner. That bolt right there, you'll want to remove that one, and then the power steering cooler will be able to slide back farther. So the power steering cooler has now been removed from the frame, and it's just sitting there loose. I'm going to show you how to relocate it and push it back closer to the radiator to make room for the winch. So the hardware kit that comes with the bumper provides two flat brackets, one labeled D for driver, P for passenger. Those brackets are going to get attached to the cooler first, and then we'll slide the cooler back in place and attach the brackets to the frame. So using the supplied 5/16 flange bolt and flange nut, attach the brackets to the power steering cooler. You'll want to just loosely install the bolts for now so that the bracket is adjustable. And now we're going to push the cooler back in place and bolt the brackets to the frame using the original bolts. And the other thing is you're going to want to make sure that these brackets are painted. Ours are not. We just grabbed some off the shelf for the install, but you want to make sure they are powder coated or painted before you install them, or they will end up rusting. So we've got the factory bolt back into the original threaded hole. You do that on both sides, and then you just want to make sure you push that power steering cooler back just far enough so it's not rubbing on the AC condenser here. You want just a little bit of clearance between there, and you want to make sure that the head of this bolt is not rubbing on the pipe there. Once you've got it adjusted appropriately, you can tighten down all of your hardware. Once your power steering cooler has been relocated, you can go ahead and reinstall the plastic portion that goes under the headlights. So we just put everything back to the original spot, clipped it back into that plastic piece, clipped the fender flare in place, put all of your plastic clips back in by the headlight here across the top. And then if you have fog lights and you're using the original fog light wiring harness, you're going to want to plug that back together, push this clip into the support there, and then you've got the original wiring that you can use for fog lights there. Now that our upper plastic is fully installed, we're ready to put the grille back on the vehicle. So you want to clip it in, align it with the slots at the bottom first, and then make sure the top pieces that these are on top of the headlight in this position, and these get hooked over the plastic piece there. And Then you just need to install the 2 black plastic clips, one on each side, and then the 2 silver screws that we took out earlier from the middle of the grill. So now the grill and the plastic and everything have all been reinstalled. It's time to get the bumper ready to install onto the truck. So if you're installing light bar, fog lights, winch, any of that kind of stuff, you'll want to put it into the bumper first. The easiest way to do it is to put the light bar in first, put your winch fair lead on, then put the winch in place, and then if you have fog lights, you know, cube lights, you can mount a couple of them here. Smaller, like an S2 or 2x3 style light can fit there. So you want to mount all that stuff into the bumper first. That'll be the easiest way to do it. And then put the bumper onto the truck. So you'll lift the bumper onto the vehicle, hang it on the mounting studs there. You're going to reuse the original nuts that came on the truck along with grade 8 flat washer, and then we've got 1/2 inch flange bolt with flat washers and a flange nut, which will go up through the bottom of the frame right here through the bumper. So hang the bumper in place and start a couple of those nuts and washers and get everything aligned and install all of your hardware. So once your bumper is hanging in place on the frame, we just kind of loosely install these nuts, just snug enough to hold the bumper from tipping forward on the mounting studs there. And then we put the 1/2 inch bolts in the bottom and we tighten those, and we use those to lift the bumper up to the height that we want. So sometimes it takes a little bit of adjustment to get an even reveal on both sides. So on this particular one, we had to put 1 washer in between the frame and the bumper, just so that it held the bumper down a little bit on this side to give it the same reveal as the passenger side. So once you've got the bumper adjusted how you like it, you can tighten down all of your hardware. And don't forget to install the nut on the inside of the frame on each side. And once all of the hardware is tightened, then you can do your wiring for your lights and winch, and your install should be complete. For those items, if you are installing frame support brackets, I have one of those right here. What you can do is, after you have the bumper all tightened down, you can remove these 2 nuts, and this one and the inside nuts will hold the bumper in place where you want it. You'll remove those 2 nuts. The frame support bracket goes over these mounting studs, wraps around the frame, and we do have separate instructions for these on our website as well. But this is where they mount, and on this particular vehicle, they've got the King reservoir mount. Normally we use the hole right behind this mount here to put a 1/2 inch bolt through the frame, and then the frame support bracket goes in between the frame and the sway bar spacer. So what you have to do in this situation, you'll put your frame support bracket in there, you can put your reservoir mount back in place, and then you'll have to drill a hole through the reservoir mount in line with the hole that's in the frame to put your 1/2 inch bolt all the way through everything to install your frame support brackets. So that should be the last thing that you need to do, and your install is now complete.